What happens when the justice system underestimates the wrong teenager? When a courtroom laughs, and the one being laughed at starts to fight back with the law itself? This is not fiction. This is the true story of a 17-year-old black student who stood trial without a lawyer and walked out a hero. If you believe intelligence has no age limit, if you've ever doubted the system could be challenged from within, this story will leave you speechless. Stay to the end, because what started as a mockery became a movement. Watch. The moment a courtroom stops laughing and starts listening. This is Courtroom Challenger, the Malik Thompson story. They thought this would be just another open and shut case, a routine hearing, a nameless teenager, a system ready to swallow him whole before lunch. But what happened inside Courtroom 3B of the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, would become the most talked about trial of the year. It started on a rainy Monday morning, the kind of gray, drizzling day where even time seems to move slower. Inside the courthouse, people shuffled through security lines. Clerks carried stacks of paper. Lawyers paced the halls, and in the middle of it all, a 17-year-old boy with dark eyes and a denim jacket stood alone. His name was Malik Thompson. To the people around him, he looked like every other defendant. On the docket that day, young black trouble. But Malik wasn't just another name. And this wasn't just another day. He was being charged with cyber theft, a serious felony. The prosecution claimed Malik had hacked into a local education nonprofit's servers, stolen data, wiped systems, cost the organization nearly $100,000 in lost records and damages. The courtroom filled quickly, not because anyone cared about Malik, but because Judge Eleanor Whitman was presiding, known for her no-nonsense style and icy glares. Judge Whitman didn't suffer fools. She moved her courtroom like a machine, efficient, precise, unforgiving. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. Malik sat beside a public defender who barely looked up from her files. The prosecutor, Daniel Reynolds, smirked as he glanced across the room. To him, this was already a win. He'd seen the evidence. A trail of IP addresses, security footage from a school computer lab, fingerprints on a confiscated device. He was ready to make an example out of Malik. But the boy sitting quietly at the defense table didn't look scared. Didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes forward, watching, waiting. Judge Whitman adjusted her glasses and peered down at Malik. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. "You're being charged with cyber intrusion, data theft, and intentional system sabotage. Do you understand these charges?" Malik nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you have anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" There was a pause. Not long, but just long enough to pull every eye in the room toward the boy. And then, he stood, straight, still, steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to represent myself." A ripple went through the courtroom. The public defender looked up, surprised. Judge Whitman blinked. "You want to do what?" Malik's voice didn't waver. "I'd like to represent myself." The prosecutor snorted. "Your Honor, this is a felony case. The defendant isn't even old enough to vote." The judge stared at Malik, then sighed. "Mr. Thompson, I strongly advise against this." But Malik only said quietly, "I've made my decision." Judge Whitman narrowed her eyes, then nodded once. Cold, calculated. "Very well," she said. "Let's proceed." She didn't hide the amusement in her voice, and neither did the people behind her. There were smirks, snickers, even a chuckle from the bailiff, but Malik didn't laugh, didn't smile, didn't flinch. He reached down, opened his backpack, and slowly pulled out a neatly organized binder, tabulated, color-coded, filled with notes, statutes, precedent. He placed it on the table, opened to the first page, and just like that, the courtroom started to shift, because this wasn't a reckless kid playing pretend. This was someone who had been preparing, waiting, studying, for a moment just long enough to feel dangerous, Nobody said a word. And deep down, everyone sensed what was coming next would change everything. The prosecutor stood with the confidence of a man who'd already won. Daniel Reynolds straightened his tie, then took a slow stroll toward the jury box. His shoes tapped a rhythmic beat against the courtroom floor. Every step echoed with certainty. "Ladies, gentlemen," he began, "the state of Georgia will show beyond a reasonable doubt that Malik Thompson orchestrated a digital attack that cost a trusted local nonprofit not only their data, but their dignity." He pointed to the screen behind him. It flickered to life. A series of charts, IP logs, timestamps, all lined up like soldiers. We traced the breach to a computer terminal inside Dunbar High School. That machine was logged into under the account of... He paused, then pointed. "Mr. Thompson." He turned back to the jury. "Security footage places him at the terminal during the breach. His fingerprints were found on the confiscated drive. There is no guesswork here." Malik watched. Calm. Patient, silent, Judge Whitman nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Defense, you may respond." Malik stood again, no stumble, no hesitation. Just a quiet presence that began to swell into something larger. "Your Honor," Malik said, "before I begin, I'd like to request a brief verification." From the prosecution. Judge Whitman looked down at him, brow arched. "Proceed." Malik turned slightly toward Reynolds. "You mentioned that the security footage captured me using the terminal at 3:18 p.m. on March 4th, correct?" Reynolds nodded. "That's what the footage shows." Malik tapped a tab in his binder. "And that same breach occurred at 3:23 p.m., within 5 minutes of that timestamp?" "Correct." Malik turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a request to subpoena the server access logs from Dunbar High School's internal network, specifically for the machine in question." Reynolds scoffed. "That's already been reviewed." Malik didn't flinch. "Then there should be no issue producing them. Because if my session ended at 3:19 p.m., as the server log shows, then the breach that happened at 3:23 couldn't have been performed under my credentials." The courtroom shifted. Quiet murmurs, eyes turning, a wave of confusion rolling toward the prosecution. Judge Whitman adjusted her glasses. "Is that true, Mr. Reynolds? Have the access logs been submitted into evidence?" Reynolds hesitated, just long enough. Too long. He flipped through a folder, frowned, then cleared his throat. "We did not include the server logs. They were deemed redundant." Malik raised an eyebrow, just slightly. "Redundant or inconvenient?" Gasps. A woman in the gallery whispered something. The bailiff frowned. Whitman banged her gavel. "Order." Malik didn't stop. "Your Honor, I believe those logs will show that someone else logged into that terminal after me, possibly using administrator override, and that would indicate tampering." Whitman looked at Reynolds. "Do you have any objection to producing those logs?" The prosecutor clenched his jaw, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor." Whitman made a note. "So ordered. Defense motion to subpoena access logs is granted." Malik nodded, then added softly, "Thank you." The judge leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on the boy, and for the first time all morning, she didn't look amused, because something about Malik's confidence didn't come from arrogance. It came from knowing, from studying, preparing, and understanding the system better than anyone expected. As he sat back down, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. Now, they were listening. The courtroom buzzed quietly as the bailiff wheeled in the evidence cart. On top sat a sealed evidence bag containing the USB drive in question, labeled, tagged, official. Prosecutor Reynolds stepped forward again. "Your Honor, as part of our evidence, the state submits this device, confiscated from the defendant's school locker 2 days after the breach." He held up a printed scan of a fingerprint analysis. "As you can see, Malik Thompson's fingerprints were recovered from the device. This, in conjunction with his presence at the terminal, clearly links him to the crime." Judge Whitman turned to Malik. "Mr. Thompson, do you have a response?" Malik stood slowly, took a breath. then stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor. But before I speak to the fingerprint, I'd like to ask a question. He turned to the jury. How many of you have ever used a public computer? At school? In a library, a cafe? Some nodded. A few hands tentatively raised. Malik nodded back. When you used that computer, did you touch the keyboard? The mouse? Did you leave your fingerprints on it? He paused. Would you say leaving those prints meant you were responsible for everything done on that machine afterward? A murmur passed through the jury box. Eyes darted between each other. Malik continued. The prosecution wants you to believe that fingerprints equal guilt, but fingerprints show presence, not purpose, and not time. He walked to the evidence cart, pointed to the bagged USB. This device was taken from my locker, but I wasn't the only one with access to that space. Students store personal and class items together. I lent my locker to classmates before. And more importantly, he turned to face Judge Whitman. There is no log of when those fingerprints were left, no timeline, no indication that the device was used by me after March 4th. Reynolds interjected. But the prints were there. That's evidence. Malik stayed calm. And yet, Your Honor, the state has not called a forensic witness to testify. No cross-examination, no expert to explain how and when the analysis was conducted. He looked at the judge. May I ask the prosecution? Was the forensic analyst subpoenaed today? Reynolds looked visibly annoyed, then shook his head. No. Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow. Why not, Mr. Reynolds? Reynolds fumbled. We believed the report would be sufficient. Malik responded. Sufficient for assumptions, maybe, but not for justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Malik turned back to the jury, his voice even. Steady. They want you to believe I'm guilty because my prints exist, but prints don't speak. They don't lie. They don't tell time. Let the silence stretch. Let the weight settle, then finished. So I ask again. If touching something makes you a criminal, then what does that say about all of us? He stepped back, sat down, and the courtroom fell into a stunned, thoughtful silence. The silence didn't last long. It cracked when Judge Whitman cleared her throat. Let's continue. Her voice was quieter now, less steel, more curiosity. Prosecutor Reynolds rose again, shoulders a bit stiffer than before. Your Honor, regardless of his arguments, the state maintains that all evidence points to Mr. Thompson. He pulled another sheet from his folder. We have a signed statement from the nonprofit's IT director, confirming the breach was traced to Malik's school account. He handed it to the clerk. Let the record reflect this supplemental document. Malik waited until Reynolds sat down, then stood. Your Honor, may I respond? Whitman nodded. Briefly, Malik opened a new section in his binder. This is a copy of an email sent by Mr. Leo Harden, the same IT director, just 3 days before the breach. He handed a printed copy to the clerk. In it, Mr. Harden confirms that multiple students used that computer during tutoring sessions. He paused, including one student with temporary admin privileges, a student who, as it turns out, was never questioned. Whitman frowned. Do you have a name? Yes, Your Honor. David Kessler. He's a senior in the same tech program. He also had access to the drive taken from my locker. A ripple of surprise flowed through the gallery. Reynolds stood again. There is no mention of Kessler in any report. Malik nodded. Exactly. That's the problem. He stepped forward, voice calm but firm. Your Honor, I move to admit a statement from Mr. Harden acknowledging Mr. Kessler's login credentials and system activity from that week. Judge Whitman looked to Reynolds. Objection. Reynolds hesitated. This information was not previously disclosed, Malik replied evenly. Neither was the forensic timeline. Yet both directly affect the facts of this case. Whitman sighed. Motion granted. The document will be entered into evidence. Malik turned back to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the state built a case around circumstantial access, but failed to check if anyone else shared that access. He paused. That's not justice, that's a shortcut. There was no laughter now, only eyes, watching, waiting. Whitman leaned back. Do you intend to call Mr. Kessler as a witness? Malik nodded. If the court permits, yes. She looked toward Reynolds. Prosecution? He looked like a man scrambling for dry land. We may need time to review. The judge nodded slowly. Then, we'll recess until this afternoon. The court will hear from Mr. Kessler. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, people whispered. Others stared. Some looked at Malik not as a defendant, but as something far more. Dangerous. Someone who might actually win. The clock struck 2 p.m. The courtroom filled once more. But the energy had changed. This wasn't a trial anymore. It felt like a reckoning. When Judge Whitman entered, she didn't speak immediately. She simply looked at Malik, then nodded. Call your witness. Malik stood, steady as ever. Your Honor, the defense calls David Kessler to the stand. A thin, pale boy with messy blonde hair stepped nervously through the side door. He adjusted his tie twice before sitting. The clerk swore him in. Then Malik approached the witness stand. Mr. Kessler, you're a senior in the advanced tech program at Dunbar High, correct? Yes. You've used the tutoring lab computer where the breach originated? Yes, many times. And on the week of the incident, March 4th, you had administrative privileges to that terminal. David hesitated. Temporarily, Mr. Harden assigned them to me for software installation. Do you recall logging into the terminal that Friday afternoon? Nodded slowly. I think so. Yes, around 3:20. Gasps. The jury shifted. Reynolds scribbled something furiously. Malik stayed calm. You logged in after me. I didn't know anything happened. I didn't do anything malicious. David's voice cracked. Malik stepped back. I'm not accusing you. I'm simply showing that someone else had access. You weren't investigated, were you? David looked toward Reynolds. No, I wasn't even asked about it. Judge Whitman leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Prosecution, any questions for the witness? Reynolds stood. His suit suddenly didn't look so crisp, his voice less confident. Mr. Kessler, do you have any direct knowledge of the breach? No. So you can't say Mr. Thompson didn't do it? No, but I can say I used that computer after he did, and no one ever asked me to explain that. Silence. Whitman dismissed the witness. David all but ran off the stand. Reynolds adjusted his Theory then turned to the judge. The state would like to reiterate that fingerprint evidence. Malik rose. Objection. We've already addressed the limitations of that evidence. Whitman held up a hand. Noted. She looked tired now. Not physically. Emotionally, like something had cracked inside her. Let's proceed. Malik walked to the center of the room. He looked directly at the jury, his voice soft, measured. They say I had access. And I did. But so did others. He paced slowly. They say my fingerprints were found. That's true. But so were David's. They built this entire case on assumptions. Assumptions based on who was easiest to blame. He paused. But evidence without context is just a story someone tells to win. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense rests. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Judge Whitman exhaled. We'll recess while I deliberate. The bailiff called for order. People stood, stared, whispered, and Malik sat down. Alone. Again. But this time, the silence felt different. He had turned the tide. Now the question was, would the system admit it? Outside the courtroom, clouds hung low. The air felt thick. Waiting. Malik sat alone on the hallway bench, Bender on his lap, head bowed. For the first time that day, his hands trembled. Just a little. Not from fear, from release, from finally being seen. The door creaked open. His mother stepped into the hallway. Denise Thompson. She was tall, composed, dressed simply but sharp. A woman who had spent 2 decades working as a paralegal in a city that often chewed people like her up. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him, then walked forward, sat beside him. You scared me, she whispered, but you made me proud. Malik smiled faintly. I wasn't sure it would work. You knew more about that courtroom than half the people in it. She squeezed his hand. You were born for this. He let the words sink in, not as comfort, but as truth. From the time Malik was 10, he would wait up for her to come home from work. While other kids talked sports, he asked her about cross-examinations. He'd sit at the kitchen table, reading legal briefs she brought home by mistake. Sometimes she'd quiz him on precedent. He'd answer like a first-year law student. She never told him to slow down. She just kept feeding his mind because she knew. She saw the way he studied, not for grades, but to understand, the way he saw through arguments, spotted contradictions, noticed silence more than noise. He was different. Not loud, not flashy, just precise. They looked at you like a kid, she said softly. But you walked in there like a lawyer. Malik exhaled. I had to. They wouldn't have listened otherwise. Denise's eyes welled up. I didn't raise you to play small. Footsteps approached. It was an intern from the court office. They're calling everyone back in. Malik stood slowly, shoulders straight, breath deep. Denise grabbed his sleeve gently. Whatever happens in there, you already changed something. He nodded, then walked back toward the double doors. Inside. A room waited. So did Justice. And Malik Thompson wasn't walking back in as a defendant. He was returning as a force. The courtroom was quiet when everyone returned. Too quiet. Even the wooden benches seemed to hold their breath. Judge Whitman took her seat. Her robe looked heavier than before. She looked at Malik, then at the prosecutor. Then she let her gaze linger on the jury box. This court has reviewed the facts presented. Her voice was calm, measured, but not cold. We've heard testimony, examined evidence, and watched a young man defend himself with clarity, courage, and extraordinary poise. She paused, hands folded on the bench, eyes steady. Mr. Thompson, you did something many adults in this room would hesitate to do. You stood up to a system that assumed you'd fold. Malik stayed still, not smiling, just listening. Judge Whitman turned to the gallery. When this trial began, I admit, I had my doubts. Not about the evidence, but about you. She looked back at Malik. I underestimated you. We all did. Her words weren't emotional, but they carried weight, the kind that lingers. In light of the new evidence, the court finds reasonable doubt in the prosecution's claims. A beat of silence. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. The charges against Malik Thompson are hereby dismissed. The courtroom erupted, not with noise but with release. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicked. A low hum of voices filled the air. Malik didn't move. He just let it settle. Like he knew this moment wasn't just his. It belonged to every kid who'd ever been doubted, every teen who'd ever been told they weren't enough. Judge Whitman stood, but she didn't leave. She looked at Malik one last time. You should apply to law school, and when you do, I hope they know what they're getting. Malik nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. She gave the smallest smile, then turned and walked away. And in that moment, for the first time all day, she looked lighter, like a judge who'd just learned something no textbook could have taught her. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones stretched over shoulders. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Malik, did you expect to win? How does it feel to take down a seasoned prosecutor? Are you planning to become a lawyer? Now Malik didn't stop, he didn't speak. He pulled his hood up, stepped into the sunlight, and kept walking. Beside him, Denise followed, shielding him like a mother lion. Not from danger, but from noise. They moved through the crowd like a current, unshaken. Across the street, Judge Whitman stood by her car. She watched them leave. There was no robe now, just a woman, quiet, thinking. In her eyes, something close to reflection, maybe even regret, because this wasn't just about a case. This was about the system that almost swallowed a boy whole. Boy who had no lawyer, no voice, except the one he built for himself. And now, people were listening. The story went viral that night. Clips from the courtroom hit social media. Justice for Malik started trending. So did Duck Let Him Lead. Emails poured into law firms, universities, even Whitman's office. Not just congratulations, but questions. How did this happen? How many others never got the chance? The next week, a local law school offered Malik a full scholarship. He didn't post about it, didn't boast. He simply nodded and said, "That's one step." He knew this wasn't over. For every kid like him who made it out, there were dozens who didn't, who couldn't, who didn't know how. So he started speaking. Not at rallies, not at protests, in classrooms, libraries, community centers, anywhere. Young people gathered. Anywhere someone might be doubting their own voice, he told his story. But more importantly, he listened to theirs. Because what happened in Courtroom 3B wasn't a miracle. It was a blueprint, and Malik wanted to share it. The legal system wasn't designed for people like him. But that didn't mean they couldn't change it. "You don't have to be perfect," he once told a crowd. "You just have to be prepared, and, when the moment comes, speak." They listened, and something started to shift. Not quickly, not all at once, but like sunlight creeping through blinds. Small, steady, undeniable. And somewhere, someone else like Malik was getting ready. Studying. Watching. Waiting, their day would come, and when it did, the system would be forced to listen again. If this story moved you, even for a moment, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it. Let others see what's possible when one voice dares to speak against the noise. Because Malik didn't just win a case, he cracked something deeper, a silence that had gone on for too long. And now, others are starting to speak too. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever felt like the system wasn't made for you, remember this. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be ready. Thank you for watching, for believing, for listening, and if you believe stories like this matter, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and help us keep the conversation alive. Because next time, it might not be Malik. It might be someone you love, and their voice could change everything.